They say screams could be heard miles. Summer, 1462. You are an Ottoman, soldier in the most powerful army on earth. You have captured Constantinople, you've toppled empires. You march to a tiny principality called Wallachia to crush the rebel prince. It should take weeks, maybe days, and then you smell it, death, decay, something else you can't quite name. Your column is slowing scouts, stopped, and when you go around the hill near the capital, you see it forest. But trees are not trees. Trees, they're people too. 20,000 of them. Your brothers, your comrades raised into the air on wooden stakes, are arranged in ideal geometric rows. As far as the eye can see, some were dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and black. The others are still moving. Still I am breathing, still screaming. Your Sultan, the man who conquered Byzantium the empire, takes one look and turns around a whole army around. What intelligence creates something similar? And here, that is the part that should scare you. It wasn't madness. It was strategy. It is cold, calculating, and terrifyingly effective. A story you think you know about Vlad Tepes. It is a lie, not because it didn't happen, but because the truth is much worse. Here is the full report about how one man turned a man into a weapon. The suffering was so effective that it changed the flow of empires. And by the end, you will understand why real horror, it wasn't what he did with the bodies. It was what did he do to the minds. Let's start with the question no one asks. What breaks a person so fully that they become capable of this? Year 1442. Vlad is 11 years old. His father, Vlad III, Vlad the Dragon, just now made a deal with the devil. No metaphorical, real with name, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. The deal is simple. Vlad II gets the right to keep his throne in Vlad. In exchange, he passes on his two youngest sons as hostages, insurance, life support guarantee his loyalty. So, young Vlad and his brother Radu were torn from their home and taken to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Not like prisoners in dungeons, but also guests in the palace at Eduna and later Agrius. They are given good clothes, education, military training. They are taught Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, and the Quran. At first glance, it looks like this, privilege. But here is what history is books embellish. This was not an education. It was psychological warfare. Vlad conducted his formative years, from 11 to 17 years old, observation his jailers perfect the art of empire the building. He studied how the Ottomans used fear as a tool of control. He witnessed public executions, planned not just punish, but traumatize entire nations into submission. He learned that terror, when used with surgical precision, there was more effective than any army. And he learned something else. He was completely powerless. While his younger brother Radu was adapting, even having formed a close friendship with the Sultan's son, Mehmed, Vlad refused bend. According to the Ottoman court records, he was often punished for his disobedience. Some sources suggest that he was beaten, possibly tortured. Accurate, the details are lost in history. But what this is definitely something fundamental. Something inside him broke during those years. Or rather, something crystallized. He developed what modern psychologists might call it stalking complex, combined with an obsessive need for control. But he directed it. Each he endured punishment, he learned each he saw him using torture techniques, remembered. He was building a mental arsenal in parts. In 1448, after 6 years of captivity, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia. He was 17 years old. 2 months later, his father was killed by rival boyars, the nobility who played on both sides between Ottomans and Hungarians. His older brother Mitya was buried alive. Vlad was alone, surrounded enemies that no one supports. And so where the story gets interesting. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to remake the world in his own image and likeness. Trauma. He would have accepted everything. The Ottomans taught him terror and rework it into something they've never done before. He'd seen it before. But first he had to wait. Vlad lived in exile for another 6 years. Conspiracy, planning, military study tactics, and political maneuvering. And in 1456, with the support of Hungary, he finally seized the Vacanian throne. The monster was about to be born. If you're fascinated by the documented psychological turning points that created the most infamous in history numbers, click subscribe. Let's start with how this broken boy became something much worse than his kidnappers that could ever be imagined. Vlad, the coronation feast in 1456 was supposed to have there was a celebration. Instead, it became plan of everything that he invited the boys' families. The same nobility that organized murdered his father and buried him the brother is alive. Hundreds of them have arrived, in their best clothes, believing that they were there to pledge allegiance to the new prince. The great hall was decorated. The wine flowed like a river. Then, in the middle holiday, Vlad stood up and asked a simple question. How many princes are there? Did you survive Lycia? The older boy answered proudly, 710. Some claim to remember a dozen different ones rulers. They boasted of their survival, their political savvy, the ability to outlive any prince who sat on throne. Vlad smiled. Then he gave every boy who answered was arrested on the spot. But here is where you see a methodical mind at work. They didn't execute him. Not yet. Instead, he divided them into two groups based on the principle about age and health. The older, the architects of his family's destruction, they were immediately impaled outside palace walls. Not quickly, the stakes were carefully inserted to avoid vital organs, ensuring their death slowly over the course of hours or days. Their cries provided the soundtrack to what happened next. Young, strong boyars and their families were deprived of their noble clothes and a forced march of 50 miles north to the ruins of Pinari Castle. There they were given a choice, which in fact, there was no choice: rebuild fortress with bare hands or die. For several months they carried stones around mountainside. They worked until their hands bled, while their beautiful clothes, their bodies rotted, until they fell from exhaustion. Most died during construction. The survivors were never the same. Vlad actually erased the old nobility and replaced them with new ones, the class that owed him everything and lived in absolute horror of his own displeasure. It wasn't just revenge, it was systematic dismantling of power, the structure that weakened Wallachia. And that revealed something important about Vlad's psychology. He didn't just want obedience, he wanted to break people so that completely, that obedience became theirs, the only possible answer. But it was still domestic politics. The boy was white. What did Vlad do next? Would have sent shockwaves throughout the empires. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, yes, the same one, Mehmed, who was Vlad's childhood friend companion, sent ambassadors to Wallachia, demanding an annual tribute, which Vlad the Father agreed to pay. Demand an additional insult came. Vlad was introduce yourself in person. Constantinople will renew its oath vassalage. The envoys arrived, waiting ordinary political theatre, perhaps some negotiations, possibly a counteroffer. They only got a preview of hell when they entered Vlad's courtyard and refused to remove their turbos. Genuine religious custom in the Ottoman Empire protocol. Vlad asked them to explain their tradition. They probably did just that. I was relieved to learn that he seemed interested, understanding, not an insult. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he said, something that was supposed to freeze them blood. I respect a man who honors his faith is so strong. Let me help you. Honor him forever. He ordered his guards. Nail the turbans directly to their skulls. Think about accuracy. This cruelty. He didn't kill them. They disfigured them in such a way that it was and symbolically loaded and medical designed to ensure that they survived journey back to Constantinople. They were walking messages, their screams echoing across the countryside when they fled back to the Sultan. When Mehmed received his ambassadors, these people he sent it in good faith. Now forever disfigured and half mad with pain, he immediately realized that this was not so a childhood friend he remembered. It was something new, something that learned the Ottoman lessons of terror and turned them into something even the Ottomans couldn't imagine it. The war had already begun, inevitable, but before this war began, Vlad had a few more messages. Here, what most people don't understand about impalement. It wasn't just an execution, it was engineering. The generally accepted image, a stake driven straight into the body, would have killed almost instantly. It defeats the whole point. Vlad, the method was much more complex and infinitely more cruel. Based on modern medical test descriptions and surviving Ottoman bills, that is how it actually worked. First, the victim was placed face down, a stake, carefully selected, rounded at the tip, and carefully lubricated, is administered through the rectum. But here is the important detail. It was inserted at an angle on purpose designed to pass all major organs and blood vessels. The victim was then slowly lifted up the vertical position, and gravity did the rest. The course of hours, and sometimes days, their own body weight, will force gradually increase the rate through them torso. The path was calculated to avoid heart, lungs, and large arteries. In some documented cases, the rate would be eventually exit over the shoulder or chest, but the victim could remain alive for up to 3 days. Why this method? Because Vlad realized something that experts in modern psychological warfare now confirm. Observing prolonged suffering exponentially more traumatic than witnessed a quick death. Beheadings on the battlefield are horrific, but in short, the impalement was a performance that lasted for several days, full of screams that could be heard throughout the valleys. But there was only one physical act component. A true genius, if we can to use such a perverted word, was in staging. When Vlad impaled his victims, they did this in the squares, along the main streets, roads, outside the city gates, anywhere where will increase visibility. He realized that this word and rumors will increase psychological impact far beyond the actual number of victims. One execution, which I witnessed 100 people, will create 100 storytellers, each of whom told another 100, and the improved symbolism is constant. The stakes were different heights depending on rank. The peasants are below, the nobles are above. The highest one, reserved for the enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual image, hierarchy that reinforced his message. Everyone has a place in my world and each will suffer according to his own suffering station. According to some sources, he organized impaled victims in geometric patterns, circles, stars, concentric rings. This wasn't random sadism. It was demonstration of control, he said. I have so much power that I can turn human suffering into art. There is a German pamphlet from 1462. Of course, it is propaganda, but based on eyewitness accounts from among Saxon merchants in Wallachia, where it is described how Vlad dines among those impaled. He allegedly had a table set up in the middle of a field stakes, ate his food, surrounded dying people, and seemed to enjoy experience. Did this particular incident occur? Exactly as described as controversial. But what is not up for discussion is this psychological message. I am so far away beyond your understanding of human behavior that doesn't concern you, me. The Saxons, who had their own complicated relationship with Vlad. These brochures were widely distributed. They were among the first to be mass-produced horror stories in European history, supplemented with illustrations in the form of woodcuts. These images, crude but effective, spread throughout Europe and strengthened Vlad's position reputation. But here is the question nobody asked. Was there any of this? It works. Was there really terrorism, an effective military strategy, or was Vlad just a sadist in a position of power? The summer of 1462 arrived, and this will prove that Vlad's methods were not just effective. They were Sultan Mehmed II a crushing blow. Finally, he got tired of it. By the beginning of 1462, Vlad not only refused to pay tribute, but also began to raid deep into the Ottoman Empire territory south of the Danube. In a particularly brutal campaign, he crossed to the Ottoman lands with a small detachment, and according to his own letter to Hungarian king, killed more than 23,000 people. He even kept a tally of the victims, classification of victims by age and gender. Mehmed, who conquered Constantinople at the age of 21, he suppressed the uprising after the uprising, who commanded the majority. The most powerful war machine on earth decided to deal with it personally, the vehicle problem. In the spring of 1462, he assembled an army, the size of which is estimated between 60,000 and 90,000 people. The exact number lost to history, but even conservative estimates suggest more than to triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. It was not the invasion, was annihilation. Vlad, there were perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 people in total. Many of them were peasant recruits from minimal preparation. Normal combat, it would have been a massacre, and Vlad did what? He had been planning this since childhood. He refused to give them the usual combat. When the Ottoman army entered Wallachia, they found nothing. Empty villages, poisoned, wells, scorched fields. Every potential the source of food and water are systematically destroyed. Vlad ordered his men leave their homes and retreat to forests and mountains, taking them away to hell with them. Ottoman supply. The lines got longer and longer, and then the night raids began. These weren't typical skirmishes. Vlad had trained specialized units in guerrilla warfare small groups of men, about 50 people. Up to 100 will strike at the Ottoman camps in deep night, killing sentries, arson and disappearance before any organized response could have formed. They targeted supply wagons, pack animals, ammunition depots. The target was not to defeat the army. This was done in order to force them paranoid, exhausted, and demoralized. But the masterpiece appeared at night the 17th of June, 1462. Vlad learned from the captured Ottoman soldiers, who were Sultan Mehmed himself set up camp near Targovishi with his personal guard, an elite Janissary regiment. It was an opportunity that will never come again. Vlad personally led a detachment of about 10,000 people in what became known as night attack. Under cover of darkness, they penetrated the massive Ottoman camp with one goal, to kill Sultan. Contemporary sources describe absolute chaos. The Vakians were dressed in captured Ottoman uniform and knew enough Turkish to cause confusion. They set fire to the tents, make the horses run, and specifically targeted at the camp, where the Sultan's tent stood. They came within a few yards of Mehmed himself. Some historians believe that Vlad and the Sultan were briefly in sight contact through the burning camp, but Gianna Janissaris conducted, forming protective circle around its leader. After several hours of close combat, Vlad realized that he wouldn't be able to break through. He ordered a retreat, and his men disappeared into the night just as suddenly how they appeared. Ottoman, the losses were relatively small, perhaps 2,000 killed, although Ottoman sources understate the numbers. But the psychological damage was catastrophic. Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in the middle of his own army was almost killed by a significantly superior enemy who appeared out of nowhere and disappeared like ghosts. Mehmed's commanders his soldiers were exhausted, and they still had a few weeks left. Constantinople marching through the dead, a landscape where every shadow can hide enemy. Then they reached the capital, and they saw who Vlad was. I am preparing for them. No written ones. The description can fully cover what Mehmed's army faced approach to Targovish at the end of June 1462. But we can try. Imagine that you, Ottoman soldier, you marched. For weeks on scorched earth, you hungry, exhausted and nervous from constant night raids. You haven't seen it yet, enemy in a few days. They just disappeared. This should be a good sign. It feels like a trap. When you get close to the Vakhi, capital, the smell hits you first. Have you ever smelled a dead animal rotting in the summer heat? Multiply this by thousands, and then add the sweet, sickening the smell of rotting human flesh. It is so thick, you can taste it. Then you see bets, first, then 10, then 100, and then you realize there is no end. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. Modern sources say that the field of impaled bodies extended to almost 2 miles long and more than half a mile wide. Modern historians argue exact number, Ottoman sources, probably minimizing for propaganda purposes reasons, claim 10,000. Vacian and Hungarian sources claim there were up to 20,000 of them. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, 15,000 and 20,000 impaled bodies. But here is what makes you tremble with fear. It wasn't a coincidence. The stakes were high, arranged in precise geometric patterns. Concentric circles radiating from the height of capital letters is ordered by line. In some sections, they form star patterns visible from the hill. Vlad had spent weeks, possibly months, preparing this. He captured Ottoman soldiers and sympathizers from previous raids and border skirmishes. He spared their lives. Specifically for this purpose, some of the bodies had been dead for weeks, rotted in the summer heat. Others were impaled quite recently, and some, according to numerous sources, they were still alive. Byzantine chronicler Leonikos Chalakondylis, who gave an interview eyewitnesses, wrote that the groans of the dying could be heard all over the whole field. Some were impaled for days. Their bodies slowly consume ourselves, too weak to scream, but still conscious. Ottoman troops, seasoned veterans who conquered cities and killed countless enemies. Vomiting was reported. Some refused to move forward. Others started desert at night, ready to take risks execution, instead of continuing through this nightmare. And in the center, on the highest pole of all of them, there was Hamza Pasha, a high-ranking and Ottoman commander captured earlier skirmish. His body was dressed in the remains of his military attire were located directly opposite the route. The Sultan's approach, personal message from Vlad Mehmed. This is what I do with your best people. Imagine that. I will do this to you. Sultan Mehmed II, remember? This is the person who was watching the walls of Constantinople are crumbling under his onslaught. Guns that ordered their share executions and massacres are reported he stopped his horse and looked silently a few minutes. This is not, it is possible to deprive his country of man who accomplished such great deeds. Who knows how to use your power in this way? Man, the one who did such things was worth a lot. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. The Sultan admitted that he was when faced with something he is not completely I understand. The mind that accepted Ottoman methods and developed them in something that even the Ottomans couldn't do. The military situation was already getting worse. Supply lines were scorched earth. The tactic worked. Night raids were destroyed morale. Own Sultan the commanders advised retreat. But there was a forest of impaled people, a psychological turning point. It turned out that traditional military thinking didn't apply here. Vlad didn't try. Win battles, he tried to break minds, and it worked. A few days later, Mehmed ordered a retreat. He left contingent under the command of the younger Vlad brother, Radu, who continued to haunt Vlad, but the Sultan himself retreated. With the main army, the strongest the world's military force invaded a tiny principality with an overwhelming numbers and would not return military defeat, but purely psychological warfare. Vlad Tepes won. But the story doesn't end there, because what happens next is revealing. Ultimately, it is a tragedy. However, this horror effective in the short term. Always in the end, it devours its owner. I think the return of the Ottoman Empire. The empire will make Vlad a hero. Christian Europe, in a sense. That is how it was. The Hungarian king and the Pope praised his defense of the Christian world. But here what they didn't understand, Vlad unable to disable it. Methods that the defeated Ottomans did not stop there. The Ottomans, he used them against everyone. By the end of 1462, Vlad had Wallachia impaled traders for inflating prices. He was impalement of boyars, suspected of disloyalty based on rumors. He impaled entire villages for minor violations. Tool he forged it to defeat a superior enemy, became his only tool for everything. His political position worsened. His brother, Radu, with the support of Ottoman gold and soldiers, stationed itself as a reasonable alternative. Hungarian support evaporated when Vlad increasingly chaotic behavior of the alienated his allies. By November 1462, just a few months after his greatest triumph, Vlad was forced to flee to Hungary territory, and here is the bitter irony. He was imprisoned by his supposed ally, King of Hungary Maccavius Corvinus, accusations that remain unclear to this day. Some sources claim that Matthias fabricated letters to make Vlad look like he negotiations with the Ottomans. Others, they suggest that Vlad has become such a burden that even his Christian allies wanted he passed away. He spent 12 years in Hungary, captivity. Not his cruel imprisonment, Ottoman youth, but house arrest in comfortable apartments. He even married Hungarian noblewoman, had children. By all accounts, he was a model, a prisoner, but in 1476, the opportunity returned. Wallachia had turned into chaos under the influence of a number of weak rulers. Prince Malaria, Stephen Great, helped organize Vlad return to the throne, supported Hungarian and Malavi troops. Vlad regained the throne in November 1476. He had maybe 2 months to rule. December 1476 or January 1477. The exact date is lost. Vlad was killed in a battle against the Ottoman troops around Bucharest. Circumstances unclear. Some sources claim that he was killed by their own people, either through betrayal or because they took him for an enemy in chaos. Others say he was suppressed by Ottoman soldiers. What is certain is the consequences. The head was cut off and preserved in honey and sent to Sultan Mehmed in Constantinople as proof of death after everything. Horror, impalement, psychological warfare. Vlad finished like a trophy on display for ridicule in the capital of the very empire he fought against all his life. His body was said to be buried in the monastery of Snagov on the island in Romania. Excavations in the 1930s. They found the tomb, but it was empty. To this day, no one knows where Vlad really is. There are some leftovers. So, what do we do with them? History. In Romania, Vlad often was glorified as a national hero, cruel but an effective leader who stood up to overwhelming advantage and preserved independence. Monuments have been erected to him. His face can be seen on tourist products for the rest of the world, especially based on Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula freely borrowed his name in history. Vlad became synonymous with vampirism and supernatural evil, which in a perverse way allows us to avoid responsibility. It is easier to think of him as a monster, something inhuman to resist true horror, because true horror is this. Everything Vlad did was human. It was painful, terribly human. He was born a monster. He was created the system that taught him that power comes through terror. This survival requires absolute ruthlessness. This compassion is weakness, and he learned these lessons and brought them to their logical limit. There was no forest of impaled people madness. This was applied psychology. The night attacks were not random violence. It was a precise military strategy. Every impalement, every mutilation, every public display of suffering was a clever move in a bigger game. And here is what should keep you awake night. It worked. Against the impossible chances without using anything but calculations horror. Vlad turned back the empire. He proved that fear, properly used as a weapon, could do what armies could not. The question is not whether Vlad was evil. That is obvious. The question is, what does this say about human nature? That was this method that effective. So what? Other calculated horrors lurk within shadows of history waiting to teach us lessons. We'd rather not learn. If you do, you want to continue to reveal inconvenient truths that textbooks bury it, sign it. Because it is history. The darkest chapters are not only about happened, they are about understanding why did it work. And here is the knowledge. We cannot afford to forget.